This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
Welcome to the Longevity Show, informing listeners on the important aspects of health, wealth, and happiness to ensure you live life to its fullest. With fascinating interviews with top authors and gurus in the field, along with the latest news in the science and technology of longevity, we're going to reveal expert advice and amazing secrets of living a longer, happier life. And now, here's your host, Jason Hartman.
It's my pleasure to welcome Patrick McKeown to the show. He is the author of The Oxygen Advantage, the simple, scientifically proven breathing techniques for a healthier, slimmer, faster, and fitter you. He's trained over 5,000 people, including Olympic and professional athletes, and it's great to have him here today, coming to us from Ireland, right? Welcome.
Thanks very much, Jason. My pleasure.
It's good to have you. So, a lot of people have talked over the years about different breathing techniques and so forth. How much do we need to pay attention to breathing? It's an autonomic thing. Most people don't think too much about it, but go ahead and take us through that a little bit.
I'll give you my story, and it's going to be similar enough to many of your listeners. I was a child growing up with asthma, and if you have asthma, you don't just have problems with your lungs. You typically have a stuffy nose. So my nose was congested. And as a result, I was chronically mouth breathing. And mouth breathing is fast breathing and it's shallow breathing. And from a stress point of view, you're in a constant state of fight or flight. And the other thing about mouth breathing is that your sleep is very shallow. Your sleep is light. You're more prone to snoring. You're more prone to obstructive sleep apnea. And I was a kid with asthma, a teenager with asthma into my early 20s, going into university, required to study and to retain information, and I hadn't the energy levels to do neither. And literally, this is where there's a difference between focus and retention of information versus just looking at the page. Because for years, when I was in high school, I was looking at the page, but I wasn't retaining the information because my attention wasn't on the subject matter. And I learned about the importance of nasal breathing after my university graduation, which I had to work very hard to get. I read a newspaper article about the importance of breathing through the nose and about breathing light. And I used the nose unblocking exercise. There's a very simple exercise to help open up your nose so that you can breathe through it. It's been known since 1923 that if you hold your breath, your nose opens up. I used that exercise. I switched to nasal breathing. That night, I taped my mouth shut with medical tape. The first morning I woke up, I was kind of getting used to it. The second morning I woke up, it was the best night's sleep that I had ever had in 20 years. Now, that's back in 1998. My concentration levels changed dramatically, my energy levels, my ability to handle stress. And physiologically, it makes a whole lot of sense. If we go around with upper chest breathing, with relatively fast breathing, with mouth breathing, it's impacting our stress levels, it's impacting our focus and concentration, it's impacting our sleep, and it's impacting our exercise ability. And those simple things, and Jason, there are plenty of breathing techniques, but very few breathing techniques are looking at the physiology of everyday breathing. And oftentimes what we're told to do is to take a big breath or a deep breath when we're stressed. Let me say this. The more air we breathe into our lungs, the less oxygen that's delivered throughout the body, including to the brain and heart.
Okay, so a couple things here before you go on. Is that safe to tape one's mouth? I would be afraid that, of that, especially during sleep. That medical tape, for example, it probably, if you were suffocating, your body would just naturally wake and you would break it with your mouth. But if it were a non-medical tape, like a strong tape, like a duct tape or something, I've heard stories of people actually suffocating due to duct tape, the mafia guys, they'll tape the guy's mouth shut and put him in the trunk of the car, and then they open the trunk and the guy's dead.
Maybe they suffocated because maybe they suffocated because they were in the trunk of a car. Yeah. Do you know, once we breathe through our nose never fully congests. And what I'm going to show you is the tape that we use, by the way, it doesn't cover the mouth. So I'll just do a demonstration. It's called myotape. And
so by the way, folks, if you're watching the video of this, you can see that, but the tape trying to describe it. Oh, I see. So it doesn't actually cover the mouth. Oh, it just makes the mouth kind of close.
It brings it together with elasticity. And also, the orbicularis muscle is surrounding the mouth. It gives me a lip pouch. I don't have to have Botox, or I don't have to have those lip fillers because this will automatically do it for me.
Yeah.
So it helps.
Now, what is that tape called?
This is called Myo tape, MYO tape.
Okay, but that's not the, it needs to be a certain cutout. That's the type of tape, but not the shape of the tape, right?
Oh, that's the tape. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Now, it's our own tape, but it's a tape that we brought out especially for people with anxiety and also in children. And the only reason being was because, of course, people can be apprehensive about taping them out. But taping them out naturally is becoming more fashionable than it was 20 years ago. For a very simple thing, if any of your listeners wake up with a dry mouth in the morning, they are not likely to have a refreshing sleep. We should never wake up with a dry mouth in the morning. And if I look at a study that was published very recently in a journal, The Laryngoscope, individuals who were mouth breathing with established obstructive sleep apnea, which is a common enough condition, their AHI was 52 events per hour.
What does that mean?
That's their apnea-hypopnea index. So it's a measurement of the severity of their sleep apnea. And sleep apnea is when there's a reduction to flow of breathing during sleep, or we stop breathing during sleep. So in very simple terms, maybe the woman has a man beside her and all she hears is really loud snoring and then complete stopping of the breath, that the man stops breathing. And he stops breathing because of collapse of the upper airways. So with mouth breathing, it really does impact. It impacts the architecture of the airway. It dries out the airway. And as I said earlier on, it leads to lighter sleep. And this is well known. So for very simple things, like it's not just about getting the mouth closed during sleep. It's also about getting the mouth closed during wakefulness. And the top sleep doctor in the world, Dr. Christian Guilleminault from Stanford Medical School, he spoke about the critical importance of restoring nasal breathing, both during wakefulness and sleep. So here we have the top sleep doctor talking about it, the founder of sleep medicine. Now, sadly, he passed away last year. He's a French doctor called Dr. Christian Guilleminault. And it is starting to become more prominent, and that's getting the mouth closed at night. And there is more of an awareness now, and I think it's absolutely vital that it's happening.
All right. So how do you do it during the day if people have this problem?
We need to have a conscious awareness of it. You know, how many times have we been told if you're stressed, take a deep breath? The question that I would say to people is, if you take a deep breath... It's
like a cliche. I mean, it's heard that many times.
It is. And it's so misinterpreted. A deep breath basically means that we have lateral expansion and contraction of the lower ribs. But a deep breath is not a big breath. If I told you, Jason, to breathe in 5 big breaths, big breath in through your mouth, a big breath out, a big breath in, a big breath out, a big breath in, a big breath out, 5 times, it's likely that you will feel lightheaded. And the reason being is because when we have big breaths, we blow off a gas called carbon dioxide from the blood through the lungs. And when we get rid of too much carbon dioxide, the blood vessels constrict. Now, in very simple terms, people with poor breathing patterns often have cold hands, cold feet, and brain fog. And not only do the 70,000 miles of blood vessels constrict when we breathe more air, but also hemoglobin, which is the main carrier of oxygen in the blood, doesn't release oxygen so readily when we breathe too much air. We know about the importance of don't overeat, but we never hear about the importance of don't overbreathe. And in a recent study...
by the way, hang on a second. So
yes.
A couple things. The other thing I didn't get to ask you about is your comment earlier about how you actually deliver less oxygen to your body or the whole body, or what did you say?
Throughout the body. Throughout tissues and organs receive less oxygen.
When you breathe harder.
When we breathe more air than what we need.
Okay, so that's counterintuitive. But the other thing you just said that was counterintuitive, but I want to add something. Maybe this isn't even your field of study, but there's really only 2 reasons people die if they don't die from an accident. They die from inflammation or they die from oxidation. That's what destroys us, those 2 things. And oxidation happens when you breathe more. So this is going to sound really counterintuitive, and I'm not a doctor. I'm not an expert here. It's just my own research. But, these people that over-exercise, which is hardly anybody, so don't worry about it, folks. It's a very small number. Most people need to do a lot more exercise, especially in America. It's terrible what's going on here. But, you can overdo it. And the more you breathe, the faster you're oxidizing. Is that part of your field of study at all, or do you have
only in a small way? And I can talk about inflammation and the impact of breathing exercise they can have.
And I don't know about inflammation, but go ahead. Yeah.
So oxidative stress, so basically free radicals which can attack different cells. That breathing can play a role. I haven't really gone down it all that much, but I would believe from what I read, it's going back about 5 years ago, so I'm not fully au fait with it. In terms of the volume of air that one breathes, that it can generate free radicals. And they looked at marathon runners. These were marathon runners across, I think it's Marathon of the Sands. I'm not sure what the name of it is. But basically, it's something like 6 marathons, one marathon after another. And they measured the oxidative stress of the athletes. Now, there's probably plenty of factors involved that's showing that there was increased oxidative stress, not just about the volume of air they breathe, but possibly the volume of air that they are breathing is one thing.
I think I need to translate from your super cool Irish accent. You're saying the word accent. Sorry, you're saying marathon, right?
Yes,
for the rest of us. Okay.
Correct.
Got it. Okay, awesome. So the marathon runners. Yeah, keep going on that study if you would.
So with that, so that's one aspect of looking at oxidative stress. Now, there's other papers written by French researchers, Julia. And they looked at triathletes who did breath holding. And these triathletes brought breath holding into their training regimes. And it significantly lowered oxidative stress. And it reduced acidosis. So there's something about changing the breath. And we typically use it with athletes as well. We work with a lot of really high, professional athletes. And we're looking at their functional breathing. And we're also giving them breath hold exercises to put their body into an oxygen debt, to simulate altitude training by simply holding the breath. And what we do is we have the athletes hold their breath while they are running, and this lowers their blood oxygen saturation. It increases carbon dioxide in the blood. It disturbs the blood acid-base balance, and this forces the body to make adaptations to improve the buffering capacity, and therefore we can delay lactic acid and fatigue. But coming back to the inflammation one is really interesting. The vagus nerve, which I'm sure you're aware of, is wandering throughout the body, and it innervates most of the major organs, including the diaphragm, etc. If we slow down our breathing rate to between 4.5 and 6.5 breaths per minute, we stimulate the vagus nerve, and that secretes or releases a substance called acetylcholine. And that in turn is, when we can increase vagal nerve traffic, it leads to a reduction in inflammation. So pro-inflammatory cytokines reduce and anti-inflammatory cells increase. And this is something that we really have to bear in mind, because when we get stressed, our breathing never gets slower. Our breathing always speeds up and we breathe harder. So fast breathing and hard breathing is not good for the human being. And by simply slowing down our breathing, and when I talk about slow breathing, we should never hear our breathing during rest. If you're in a yoga studio, you shouldn't hear your breathing during rest. That we need to look at breathing from 3 different angles. One is the speed of breathing, but the other is how much air are you taking in that during that breathing. And the other aspect is, are you breathing high or are you breathing low? So the acronym that we use are, we need people to breathe light, to breathe slow, and to breathe deep. And the acronym is LSD. And light is about gently softening the volume of air that we breathe to expose the body to increased carbon dioxide. Very simple exercise. You can improve your blood circulation within 3 minutes, and you can experience it with warmer hands by not breathing more air. And that's what Western society tells us to do. It tells us to breathe more air, whereas you can improve your blood circulation and experience it in about 3 to 4 minutes by breathing less air, by feeling air hunger for 3 to 4 minutes. You'll start to notice the temperature of your fingers increasing.
Okay, so what about the exercises on our smartwatches, where it'll prompt you to breathe, right? Is that a good exercise or is that actually counterproductive?
Well, it's like this. If we time the breath, you have to ask the question, how much air are we taking in during that breath? So say, for example, if you have one individual and they are breathing in for 5 seconds, breathing in for 5 seconds and breathing out for 5 seconds, one individual can take a full lungs of air during that 5 seconds inhalation. And another individual can really soften the breath and they can breathe in very lightly over 5 seconds and breathe out lightly over 5 seconds. So the thing about timing breathing, if we're following it on an app, it doesn't give us any indication of the volume of air that we breathe. And it comes back to it. I spoke about the release of oxygen.
I think the thing, though, at least the way I think of it, and, I've done a lot of yoga in my life,
yes.
So they always do breathing integration and so forth. But the way I think of the watch's prompting is that you take a deep, slow breath. So you're taking a lot of air in. You're doing it less frequently rather than the frequent shallow breaths. So,
yes.
But that would be, in your mind, that would be bad, those deep breaths, right?
If you hear your breathing, correct.
Okay, so that's the metric. So if you hear it.
This here is a book written by a yoga instructor, Robin Rottenberg. It's 120,000 words. She is teaching yoga for 30 years, pranayama. She developed sleep apnea, I think it was sleep apnea, chronic fatigue and asthma. She was teaching, as most yoga instructors teach, is to breathe more air. And how do I say that, or why do I say it? Well, how many times in a yoga studio will you hear people breathe? It doesn't make sense to hear people breathe during light movements or during rest. You never see an animal out in a field taking bigger breaths and intentionally taking more air into their body because they believe it's good to take big breaths. So Robin Rottenberg, she went back to the sutras of yoga. She asked the question, when yoga was developed, whether it was 2,500 years ago or 2,000 years ago, how did the ancient yogis describe breathing? And they describe breathing is supple, and breathing should never be hard. So it's not just about the speed of the breaths that we take in and out of the body. It's also about the quantity of air that we take with each breath, because ultimately we have to look at what's the volume of air a person is breathing per minute, how fast are they breathing per minute, and where are they breathing? Are they breathing through their mouth, activating the upper chest, or are they breathing slow and low?
Mm-hmm. All right. What else should people know?
Well, I think, how many times if you go to a gym, how many people are in there exercising with their mouths wide open? I would say it's 95%. And if I was just to summarize the benefits of nasal breathing, first of all, I'm going to show you an anatomy of the nasal cavity. If we look, so here we have the nose itself, and here we have the lips. And when we look at the view here, if we look at is there any function in the mouth? Does the mouth perform any function in terms of breathing? When we take air in through our mouth, that air literally goes straight down our throat, and our mouth does absolutely nothing for breathing. And
in other words, it doesn't filter the air, certainly.
It doesn't filter it. It doesn't moisten it. It doesn't warm it. It doesn't harness a gas called nasal nitric oxide, which, by the way, is antiviral. We should be breathing through our nose during these times. Whatever chance of defense we have against COVID, our nose is our first line of defense, not our mouth.
It's like wearing a mask. It's a filter. Yeah.
It's a filter.
And by the way, one thing, I saw a video on YouTube, a lot of people pluck their nose hairs, right? You should not do that because those hairs filter. That's part of the filtering system. You should trim them, not pluck them. Okay. That's the difference.
Yes.
So little tip there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to see a bunch of hairs hanging out of your nose, folks. Okay, so do trim them, but don't pluck them. Yeah.
So if I ask any students to take a breath through their mouth, and then I ask, well, what part of the body is activating? Like, Jason, if you look down at your chest, and if you take a breath through your mouth, when you breathe through your mouth, what part of the body is engaged? And typically it's upper chest. When we look at the greatest concentration of blood in the lungs, it's actually in the lower lobes. The greatest concentration of blood flow is in the lower lobes. By nasal breathing, and this has been known since 1988, that the pressure of oxygen increased in the blood by 10% when individuals were forced to nasal breathe post-jaw surgery. Now, there's a professor of sports sciences called George Dallum in the United States. He has been looking at nasal breathing during physical exercise for the last 6 years or so. He's done studies on it. He got 10 recreational athletes. He got them to breathe exclusively through their nose for all physical exercise. Number one was, at the end of 6 months, they were able to achieve 100% work rate intensity with nasal breathing versus mouth, but they had 22% less ventilation. Now, can you imagine achieving 100% of your work rate intensity with 22% less ventilation? There's an economical saving there. But the fraction of expired oxygen was less with nasal breathing. In other words, the body utilized oxygen more. Your nose is there to protect the upper airways and the lungs, and mouth breathing does nothing. And your nose is also linked with the diaphragm breathing muscle. And the diaphragm breathing muscle is not just for respiration. It's the diaphragm that provides stabilization for the spine. And people who have dysfunctional breathing typically have dysfunctional movement and are at a greater risk of injury. And if I say the amount of times that people sent me emails saying that they had lower back pain, and when they start switching to nasal breathing and gently activating and improving the amplitude of the diaphragm, that the diaphragm breathing muscle is helping to support the support for the lower back.
That's amazing.
There's so much going on.
Nobody would think those things, all this stuff is connected like this. That's really incredible.
It's all there. I've just written a new book. It won't be published for about 6 months or so. It's 140,000 words, and it's looking at the application of breathing. And it's where, I'm really backing it up in terms of the papers and the available research that's out there. Because if we look at Kiesel's paper that I spoke about, I didn't speak about him, but Kiesel is a professor of physical therapy from Evansville University. I think it's in Colorado. He looked at 51 subjects, 27 years of age, and only 10% of them had functional normal breathing. Now, I'm not saying that 90%, but the 90% of them failed either one dimension or all three dimensions of breathing. And we're looking at young individuals here. So dysfunctional breathing and poor breathing patterns, as you said at the very start, breathing is involuntary, that's correct, but we are not living in natural times. We are not living the same way that we evolved, and our lifestyles are completely different. How many hours a day do we spend sitting at desks? How many hours a day do people spend talking? And how tired are they following a day's talking? What happens when you talk too much all day long? It makes you breathe more air, and you are absolutely exhausted, because the more air you breathe, the more your blood vessels constrict, and the less oxygen that's delivered to the brain. Talking, people sometimes think, well, I'm exhausted after a day's talking because I've had to concentrate all day long. Not necessarily. I talk for a living. I'm on autopilot. I don't even have to think about what I have to say. Most people in their jobs don't have to think about what they have to say because muscle memory, it's all there. It's all stored. It's all programmed. But how do they breathe during their talking? And one rule during talking is...
Because when I talk and I talk for a living too,
yes.
It's pretty tiring. I don't think people realize that. At the end of the day, I just don't want to talk to anybody. And, I'm exhausted sometimes when I do a lot of interviews in one day. Yeah.
Yes. But then, Jason, do you go to sleep that night with your mouth wide open and wake up with a dry mouth in the morning? And, and I was doing that. I have to say that if I look at children, this was research with Karen Bonnet looked at sleep disorder breathing, published back in 2012. For 8 years, she looked at 11,000 children with sleep disorder breathing. Children with snoring, children with sleep apnea, if it was untreated by age 5, by the time they were age 8, they had a 40% increased risk of special education needs. And mouth breathing is a contributory factor to that. So, and the other thing I'll say is all mouth breathing children develop crooked teeth. And there's the application of this is immense. And there are some wonderful orthodontists in the United States. Dr. William Hang from California. There's academies, the Academy of Orofacial Myofunctional Therapy, Mark Moeller. There's a huge cohort of professional individuals who know about the impact of mouth breathing in dentistry. But unfortunately, not all dentists
speak on that once. Yeah, it's very interesting. And, another interesting component, maybe not of this, but it's an interesting thing, is tongue posture.
Yes.
Never thought about that before. Can you speak on that for a moment? Do you know about that?
Yeah, of course. Like, again, if we were thinking about sleep, we have to consider, the tongue occupies a lot of space in the mouth. You can see this in that anatomical model here. And our tongue has got two places to be. It's either in the roof of the mouth or it's falling into our throat. Now, we need to have 3/4 of our tongue elevated in against the palate. So 3/4 of the tongue should be up against the roof of the mouth. And that's what our tongue should be all the time. We should wake up with our tongue in the roof of the mouth in the morning. And excuse me for your female listeners, but I always say to my male audience, any male should wake up with 3 things. Their tongue should be in the roof of the mouth, their lips should be together, and they should wake up with an erection. And that's very, very important. And I know because it's in terms of, if that's not happening, and sleep disorder breathing, the man is less likely to wake up with an erection, and that can signify an issue with the heart. So it's very important for the male to do that. Now, of course, with females...
And so snoring is always bad, right? If you snore, it's a bad
Snoring
thing.
is not good. And it's really bad with kids because their brains are developing. Now, there's 2 types of snoring. There's a mouth snoring goes like this because there's vibration of the soft palate. This is where taping comes in. If you tape your mouth, you don't mouth snore. That's it. It stops. But there is nose snoring. And nose snoring goes a bit like this. Now, what I would like you to do is, I would like you to breathe really slowly. I'm not sure if you can see my finger there, but I'm just gently, breathe really slowly, breath in. Real slow, gentle breath in. And now a really slow, gentle breath out. And when you slow down your breathing, now what I would like you to do is to snore through your nose with really slow breathing. So when you slow down your breathing, is it easy to make the sound of a snore? And here is the problem.
No, it has to be faster, right?
Exactly.
Okay, got it.
But the issue here is that the doctors are looking mainly at the anatomy of the airway, but they are not looking at flow. And if you have an individual who is breathing a little bit fast and a little bit hard and a little bit upper chest during wakefulness, they then have hard and fast breathing during sleep. There's increased turbulence in the airway, and that increased resistance to breathing can cause much more than snoring. It can cause obstructive sleep apnea. And obstructive sleep apnea, we have no idea of the impact of this condition in terms of road traffic accidents. 25% is what it's implicated in. Diabetes, stroke, Alzheimer's, fibromyalgia, cancer, high blood pressure, and the list goes on. And what's more, 43% of men over 50 years of age, 43% of men, and that's a European study. And those stats will be similar enough in the United States. And sometimes they can even be a little bit higher because sleep apnea, it does increase when we put on a little bit of weight.
Wow, amazing. Really interesting stuff. Where can they find your book and find out more about your work?
The book is called The Oxygen Advantage, and our website for sports performance is oxygenadvantage.com. And for sleep and for panic and asthma, it's buteyko.clinic.com. And then the tape, it's myotape.com, myotape.com.
And Patrick, one more question, and this is kind of a funny one, but the book is called The Oxygen Advantage.
Yes.
And could it almost be, I see why you called it that, that's obviously an attractive title, but could it almost be called The Oxygen Disadvantage?
Well,
in that we shouldn't have too much of it?
Well, see, the thing is, it's not necessarily about it's really about how can we breathe to improve oxygen delivery to the tissues. And in order to improve oxygen delivery to the tissues, with breathing less is more. And what I'd say to your listeners is, when you're sitting down sometime later on today, you've got a quiet time to yourself, focus on your breathing. Breathe in and out through your nose and really slow down the speed of the air that you are taking in and out of your nose, and breathe less air. And breathe less air for about 3 to 4 minutes. And see what does it do to the saliva in the mouth? What does it do in terms of activating the body's relaxation response? And what does it do to the temperature of your fingers? Can you activate the body's relaxation response? Can you increase the watery saliva in the mouth, which is evident of that? And can you influence your blood circulation within 3 minutes by breathing less air? And this is what people are not talking about, but they should be.
Fascinating. Just one last thing before you go. Back to my comment earlier about exercise.
Yes.
So would you agree that exercise, not in and of itself, obviously has its benefits, but it does make you breathe more, right?
Yes.
So what about that? What do I do? Exercise is good for me, but breathing too much is not.
How much air do we breathe for a given level of physical exercise? Can you picture an overweight person walking down a sidewalk, and they're walking down the sidewalk at a very normal pace, and they're extremely out of breath?
Yes.
So there's one picture.
Right.
And then can you picture an elite runner, and they're running?
They hardly have to breathe at all because
they hardly have to breathe.
Right.
So even though with physical exercise we need to breathe more, because normally we've increased metabolic activity, we need more air. But the question is, how much air are we breathing for a given level of physical exercise? And the amount of air that you breathe during your exercise is actually influenced by your everyday breathing patterns. So if as me as a kid and many others, so common, sleeping with the mouth open, going around with the mouth open, regular sighing, upper chest breathing, if that's our everyday breathing pattern, well, when we do physical exercise, our everyday breathing pattern is going to translate into the same pattern during physical exercise. We are more likely to experience disproportionate breathlessness. We gas out too soon. We have muscle fatigue. We have trauma to the airways, and it's inefficient and it's uneconomical. So, I think the volume of air that we breathe needs some attention.
Okay, so not sure I totally follow that, but definitely when you're in better shape, you need less air because your system is more efficient at using the air it has, right?
It's partly true. We can have elite athletes with poor breathing. Poor breathing, our breathing pattern is influenced by a number of things, but one influence is the chemosensitivity to a gas called carbon dioxide. And say, for example, if you have an individual who's prone to anxiety or panic or asthma or other different conditions and genetically influenced as well, they can have a strong chemosensitivity to the buildup of carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is the primary driver to breathe. So if we have a strong chemosensitivity to the buildup of carbon dioxide, our breathing is heavy and our breathing is hard. Physical training doesn't necessarily correct that. It's our everyday breathing that determines how well we breathe during physical training. So if I'm bringing in somebody, I measure their breath hold time, which gives me good feedback of their chemosensitivity to carbon dioxide. And you can measure the degree of breathlessness of an individual by simply asking them to breathe in through their nose, breathe out, pinch their nose, hold their breath, and time it in seconds until they feel the first definite desire to breathe. The person that I was talking earlier on the sidewalk, the person who's overweight, the person with extreme breathlessness during very, very light physical exercise, if I was to sit that person down, and if I was to ask them, take a breath in and out through your nose and hold your nose, and to time it, they will have a short breath hold time. And they have a short breath hold time that's partly influenced by chemosensitivity to carbon dioxide. What I want to do is I want to give them breathing exercises, build up their breath hold time, and as their breath hold time improves, then their breathing during physical exercise reduces. So your breath hold time, comfortable breath hold time, is an indicator of the severity of your breathlessness during physical exercise.
Okay, good stuff. Very interesting. This is fascinating, Patrick. Thank you so much for sharing this. A lot of it counterintuitive, not stuff that people would think of, definitely. So very important that people check out the book, The Oxygen Advantage, and go to those websites for more information. Patrick, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.